celebrating its record-breaking IPO, a $75 billion offering.
Some are calling this the greatest wealth-generating event in history.
First of all, I really need to give some thought to how can I provide advice that would be most helpful, and I'm not sure I've given enough thought to
Makes him the pivotal figure of our age. And a big part of today's SpaceX valuation is the idea of putting data centers and the world's vast computational needs off the planet.
Welcome to the debate. Hello, we are back here with command figures. If you look at Elon Musk through a macro lens, you see a savior. You know, a man engineering multi-planetary life, charting courses to Mars, accelerating this massive transition to sustainable energy.
Right, the whole saving humanity narrative.
Exactly. But if you pull the lens back to his living room, you see a man who really cannot navigate his own family. So today we are asking a pretty brutal question about the world's richest man.
And it's a necessary one.
Yeah. Does Musk's timeline of, multiple divorces, his manic obsession with sleeping on the factory floor, and his deeply fractured relationship with his transgender daughter, Vivian, does all that demonstrate that to become a tech god, one must structurally shut off human empathy?
It's a heavy question.
It is, and my position is that the total shutdown of human empathy is not an accident here. It is a structural requirement. It is the unavoidable heavy cost of bending physics and industry to your will to build the future.
Well, I approach this entirely differently. I argue that we are simply romanticizing psychological damage here.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because this profound lack of empathy, it's not a prerequisite for aerospace or automotive innovation. It's not some noble, calculated sacrifice made on the altar of human progress. Rather, it's a tragic manifestation of Musk's unhealed childhood trauma and his highly destructive demon mode.
Demon mode, right?
Yeah, treating your family and your workforce as collateral damage is a psychological dysfunction. It is not a leadership requirement.
Well, the reason I believe this emotional shutoff valve is so essential comes down to the mechanics of extreme ambition. If we trace Musk's path chronologically, we see a man constantly faced with the impossible.
I mean, legacy industries are tough, sure.
They are. To force entrenched industries like aerospace to adopt reusable rockets, or automotive to pivot entirely to electric, it requires an absolute refusal to accept conventional human limitations. And empathy is fundamentally about accepting and accommodating the limitations and feelings of others.
Okay, but
You just cannot accommodate limitations and simultaneously achieve the impossible. The exact same intense dissociation that allowed Musk to sleep under his desk, smelling like metal dust, to save Tesla from bankruptcy is what caused him to view his wives as employees and alienate his children. You cannot disentangle the two.
I have to push back there. Viewing human relationships as an obstacle to progress is just a profound failure of perspective. By looking closely at the timeline of his life, it becomes painfully clear that Musk is simply repeating the cycle of abuse he suffered under his father, Errol.
The South Africa years.
Exactly. His estrangement from his daughter, Vivian, his string of broken marriages, the capricious firings of employees on the assembly line, these are not calculated, high-minded sacrifices. They are the tragic fallout of a man who refuses to heal his own demons.
But don't you think...
We just have to separate the genius of the engineering from the toxicity of the behavior. You do not need to emotionally traumatize your children or operate in a state of constant paranoid dysregulation to build a reusable rocket. His empire is fundamentally tainted by the fact that he scaled his unhealed childhood trauma globally.
To understand the origin of that psychological architecture, though, we really have to look at the crucible of apartheid-era South Africa. The environment Musk grew up in was violently unforgiving. I mean, we are talking about severe, relentless schoolyard bullying.
Yeah, he was hospitalized.
Right, in one specific incident, he was beaten so badly by a gang of boys that he was thrown down a concrete stairwell. But the real tragedy is the mechanism of what happened next.
Going back home.
Exactly. He goes home from the hospital, and his father, Errol, forces him to stand there for an hour, enduring unrelenting verbal abuse, actively taking the side of the bullies. When the home is more dangerous than the gang that hospitalized you, where do you find safety? You find it in the absolute, unemotional certainty of math and physics.
And that environment is the exact origin point of what Walter Isaacson and Grimes refer to as his demon mode.
Right.
When a child is subjected to physical violence outside the home and extreme psychological violence inside it, the brain literally alters its neural pathways to survive. Elon Musk was described as a volatile Jekyll and Hyde figure. You never knew what would trigger his rage.
So he had to adapt.
Right. It instilled profound, untreated PTSD in young Elon. He learned to dissociate as a survival mechanism. That demon mode, this dark, emotionally detached, highly volatile state he still enters today, is a classic trauma response.
Yeah, I hear you on the trauma response.
When the pressure mounts, he snaps back into that traumatized child state, lashing out at those around him with a cold, detached cruelty, because his nervous system believes he's still fighting for his life.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Isn't this emotional shutdown like a ship captain sealing off a flooded compartment to save the entire vessel?
A ship captain?
Yeah. I mean, yes, it was an extreme trauma response, but didn't that exact emotional armor become his superpower? Could his empire even exist if he hadn't built that impenetrable emotional armor? To survive Errol, Musk literally had to rewire his brain to structurally shut down fear.
But shutting down fear?
And you cannot selectively numb emotion. If you shut down fear and vulnerability, you invariably shut down empathy along with it. That impenetrable emotional armor is exactly what allowed him to develop his famous first principles thinking. He learned to strip every problem down to raw physics because human emotions were just too dangerous to engage with.
But a ship captain sealing a flooded compartment is a temporary emergency protocol. Musk has moved into the flooded compartment permanently. He lives underwater.
Well,
His demon mode isn't a calculated protective shell, it's an uncontrolled emotional dysregulation. Isaacson explicitly notes that when Musk snaps out of these dark moods, he hardly remembers the damage he just inflicted.
because it's a dissociative state.
Right, and that is not a captain saving a ship, that is a captain having a blackout while his crew drowns. The cognitive ability to rethink the raw physics of battery cost has absolutely nothing to do with the emotional inability to comfort a child. You can utilize first principles thinking in the boardroom without verbally abusing your engineers or emotionally abandoning your family.
You say they have nothing to do with each other, but that emotional armor doesn't just turn off when he leaves the factory. You can't be an unfeeling machine at work and suddenly flip a switch to become a vulnerable, equal partner at home.
Which we see in his marriages.
Exactly. We see that exact same uncompromising absolutism completely suffocate his romantic life. Look at his first marriage to Justine Wilson, spanning from 2000 to 2008, arguably the most critical period for the survival of his companies.
Oh, absolutely.
At their wedding reception, while they are literally dancing, he leans in and tells Justine, "I am the alpha in this relationship." He establishes the hierarchy instantly.
And that need for total dominance completely suffocated the marriage. Justine herself wrote in her 2010 Marie Claire essay that he repeatedly told her, "If you were my employee, I'd fire you."
A brutal thing to say to a spouse.
It proves a fundamental structural inability to connect with partners as equals. He requires absolute submission to his reality. And look at how he handled unimaginable grief. When they lost their firstborn son, Nevada, to SIDS at 10 weeks old, it was a sudden, chaotic tragedy.
Heartbreaking.
Right. And for a man whose entire psychological framework relies on mathematical certainty and control, SIDS is the ultimate system failure. His response was to completely shut down emotionally and demand they move immediately to IVF.
Which eventually resulted in twins and then triplets.
Yes, he processes a grieving family the exact same way he processes a failing rocket. Optimize the system, iterate the production, and completely eliminate the unpredictable human emotional variable.
It sounds incredibly cold. I agree. But consider the context of that exact era. We are talking about 2008. The global financial crisis is destroying markets. SpaceX has just had 3 consecutive failed launches.
The fourth launch was the absolute last chance.
Exactly, their absolute last chance before bankruptcy. Tesla is hemorrhaging money and literally days away from completely folding. If Musk had prioritized being an empathetic, emotionally available, present husband during that specific crisis, wouldn't SpaceX and Tesla have gone bankrupt?
Well, I don't know if I'd frame it that way.
He poured every last cent of his personal fortune into saving those missions. The absolute prioritization of the company over the spouse, the ruthlessness to ignore the collapsing marriage to ensure the rockets fly. Isn't this ruthlessness the exact price of admission for a tech god?
That assumes empathy and ambition are mutually exclusive, which is a false binary. Look at what happens next. He divorces Justine and then marries Tallulah Riley in 2010. He divorces her in 2012.
Right.
He remarries her in 2013. He divorces her again in 2016. He treats human relationships the way an engineer treats a software update. If version 1.0 fails, issue a patch, reboot the system, and try again.
Iterative design.
But human beings are not code. Tallulah Riley herself pointed out that he was seeking a sort of paternal validation, attempting to recreate the chaos of his childhood environment. The fact that he cannot maintain a partnership isn't proof of his messianic dedication to humanity. It is proof of his profound internal isolation. He has systematically surrounded himself with an echo chamber where he is the undisputed alpha, and any relationship that demands compromise is simply discarded.
When you spend years conditioning yourself to be the undisputed alpha to keep companies alive, you inevitably begin to view yourself as the primary engine of reality. Let's look at how that absolute dedication escalated between 2017 and 2018.
The Model 3 production hell.
Yes, Tesla is struggling to hit 5,000 cars a week. Wall Street short sellers are actively betting on the company's imminent death. Musk's response is a level of factory floor asceticism that borders on the monastic.
Unprecedented, really.
He physically moves his primary residence to the Fremont and Nevada factories for 3 years. He sleeps under his desk, waking up smelling like metal dust.
He orchestrated a massive spectacle of his own suffering to guilt his workforce.
Well, he specifically slept under the desk in the open so that during the shift changes, the entire manufacturing team would have to step over him. He articulated that if the team thought he was off drinking Mai Tais on a tropical island, they wouldn't push themselves past their limits.
So it was performative.
But seeing him sleeping on the floor meant they gave it their absolute all. This is kinetic leadership. It is a maniacal sense of urgency that was mathematically necessary to defeat the short sellers and force the electric vehicle revolution into existence. He didn't just ask his employees to bleed, he bled first. He proved that saving a macro-level mission requires the total, brutal sacrifice of a personal life.
I don't dispute his grueling work ethic, but look at the psychological wreckage he left in his wake on that factory floor. That environment systematically destroyed psychological safety.
Because of the pressure?
Because he wasn't just sleeping on the floor, he was prowling the assembly lines in demon mode. He would fire engineers capriciously, on the spot, if they couldn't instantly answer impossibly complex technical questions. He relied entirely on fear.
He demanded excellence.
There is an enormous difference between leading a mission-driven team and leading a team by terror. By moving into the factory, he physically abandoned his growing family for 3 years, and he demanded that his workforce mirror that exact dysfunction. You can scale production and hit 5,000 cars a week without creating a culture of constant dramatic duress.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. Is it possible that the product he is actually building isn't the car, but the machine that builds the machine? And to do that, he literally had to become a machine himself, making human connection impossible?
Become a machine?
Consider his famous 5-step engineering protocol, what he calls the algorithm. Step 1 is to question every requirement. Step 2 is to delete parts and processes. He believes if you aren't forced to add things back in later, you aren't deleting enough.
Right. Delete, delete, delete.
Now look at how he applies that exact algorithm to his human existence. He deletes the parts of his life that do not directly serve the output. He deletes leisure. He deletes family dinners. He deletes emotional availability. He transforms himself into the most highly optimized, ruthless component of the factory.
But applying an industrial manufacturing algorithm to the human soul is catastrophic. When you treat people as interchangeable parts to be optimized or deleted, you entirely lose your humanity. And when you spend years treating your workforce as components in a machine, you inevitably bring that same ruthless calculus home. Which brings us to the ultimate breakdown of his mathematical worldview, the modern era, from 2020 to the present.
The 12 children.
Yes. Musk has fathered 12 children with 3 different women, repeatedly citing an underpopulation crisis. He views the survival of humanity entirely through demographics and birth rates. Contrast that massive macro obsession with the intimate micro-reality of his completely fractured relationship with his estranged transgender daughter, Vivian Jenna Wilson.
Right. Vivian legally dropped his last name in 2022. She explicitly stated in court documents that she did not wish to be related to her biological father in any way, shape, or form.
And that estrangement happened because of his profound public cruelty. This is where the mathematical worldview completely fails.
In what way?
Well, in his 2024 interview with Jordan Peterson, Musk didn't just casually mention his daughter, he dead-named her to an audience of millions. He told the world that she was killed by the woke mind virus.
He also claimed he was tricked into signing forms for her gender-affirming care during the chaos of COVID.
He did. And Vivian fought back brilliantly. She gave a highly detailed interview calling him an absent, uncaring, and narcissistic father. She revealed that he had relentlessly harassed her for her high voice and her queerness since she was in the 4th grade.
Wow.
He bullied a child for her femininity. This isn't a man sacrificing his family time because he's too busy saving the world. This is a bully actively recreating the trauma Errol inflicted on him. He fundamentally cannot accept a child who does not fit perfectly into his rigid, patriarchal algorithm.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because his macro love for humanity is undeniably changing the world. I mean, I'm not defending his treatment of Vivian. It is objectively heartbreaking.
It really is.
But I look at the underlying mechanics of his brain and ask if this failure is a structural inevitability. He is fighting what he perceives to be literal existential threats: global warming, multiplanetary extinction, AI safety.
Okay, but how does that excuse?
If his brain is optimized to solve the underpopulation of the planet by viewing children as a mathematical necessity for species survival, it operates purely on a cosmic scale. Is his failure to accept Vivian simply the ultimate proof that you cannot program empathy into a mind wired exclusively for cosmic scale engineering? He fundamentally lacks the software to navigate the nuanced, highly individualized, deeply emotional reality of a transgender daughter. Empathy is a micro-level variable that disrupts his macro-level calculus.
You are setting up a false dichotomy that suggests cosmic scale engineering inherently requires bigotry. It doesn't. He didn't simply ignore Vivian because his brain couldn't process her identity. He actively went out of his way to publicly humiliate her.
Well,
he bought Twitter, transformed it into X, and has repeatedly used it as a massive megaphone to amplify anti-trans rhetoric. That is not the behavior of a man whose brain is too focused on Mars to care about the micro level. That is the behavior of a man who is deeply personally triggered because he cannot exert total control over another human being's identity.
that is a fair point about control.
He can mathematically control a rocket's trajectory, but he cannot control his daughter's gender, and that infuriates him.
Control is undeniably his central paradigm. In every single business venture, he insists on vertical integration. He builds the software, the hardware, the seats, the engines. He does it so he never has to rely on outside suppliers.
Exactly.
He demands total, unbroken control over every atom of the process. And you are right, when a child exercises basic human autonomy, that vertical integration breaks down completely.
He vertically integrates his life to avoid vulnerability, but you cannot vertically integrate a human being. When a child exercises autonomy, his entire paradigm shatters, and that is why his leadership style despite its massive financial success, is ultimately incredibly fragile.
Fragile?
Yes, by completely shutting off his empathy. He has isolated himself. Yes, he built incredible rockets and revolutionized the auto industry. But as researchers who study these ruthless late 20th century fortunes have pointed out, this predatory, aggressive ethos leaves a massive human cost.
It certainly does.
Look at the reality of his current existence. He is the wealthiest man in the history of the world, living in a self-imposed psychological exile, raging daily on a social media platform he bought because he couldn't handle being told what to do. He successfully reached the stars, but he completely failed the people sitting in his own living room.
We have traced this trajectory from the violent crucible of South Africa, through the suffocation of his marriages, down to the metal dust of the factory floor, and finally to the tragic public estrangement from Vivian. My stance remains that the sheer velocity and unprecedented scale of Musk's achievements demand this exact dissociation.
And I still disagree.
To build the future, he had to fundamentally divorce himself from the present human experience. He is, in many ways, a casualty of his own mission. The emotional shutoff valve was the only mathematical way the electric vehicle revolution and commercial spaceflight could have happened on this accelerated timeline.
And my stance remains that the empire was built in spite of the trauma, not because of it.
We look at the staggering innovations and mistakenly assume the cruelty and the emotional devastation were necessary ingredients in the recipe. They were not.
You think they could have happened without it?
Absolutely. The brilliance of his first principles thinking is entirely separate from the tragedy of his unhealed demons. The fact that he scaled his dysfunction globally, leaving a devastating trail of broken marriages, traumatized employees, and a daughter who refuses to carry his name. It proves that human empathy is not a variable you can simply delete from the equation without suffering catastrophic personal failure.
It is the defining paradox of his life. We have a man who loves the abstract concept of humanity so deeply that he will sacrifice his sanity, his fortune, and his sleep to preserve it, yet he struggles profoundly to love the actual, individual human beings standing right in front of him.
A profound tragedy.
We both agree on the immense, heavy human cost of Musk's ambition. The trail of collateral damage is undeniable. But we leave it to you, the listener, to decide whether that cost is the tragic but necessary physics of technological greatness or simply the avoidable tragedy of a man who couldn't heal himself. There is so much more to explore in this material, and the final judgment rests with history. Thank you for listening. Do not forget to click like and subscribe and write your opinion in the comments section.